It's October 5th, 2022, 8 p.m. My name is Kessie Ian Anderson, and welcome back to another episode of Heresiarch.
Shoot once. A boot into the face, the dream that fills your night. Decades later, it seems George Orwell might be right. Your dead polemics have sent millions to their graves. Despite your army, still will never be your slaves.
In this episode, I'm going to try to unpack why Russia and Ukraine are currently a thing, and how I will argue it falls right at the feet of NATO after the collapse of the USSR in 1991.
Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, tension over Ukraine remains high between Russia, the U.S., and NATO. U.S. officials are accusing Russia of sending more troops to the Ukrainian border just days after Moscow claimed it's pulling some troops back. Meanwhile, Ukrainian authorities and Russian-backed separatists are both accusing the other side of violating a ceasefire in the eastern Donbas region of Ukraine. We begin today's show looking at the roots of the crisis with a former American diplomat who served as the last U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union prior to the collapse of the USSR. Ambassador Jack Matlock held the post from 1987 to 1991. He was first stationed in Moscow in the early 1960s and was there during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Matlock has written extensively about U.S.-Russian relations. His books include Reagan and Gorbachev, How the Cold War Ended, and Superpower Illusions, How Myths and False Ideologies Led America Astray. His latest article is headlined, I Was There, NATO and the Origins of the Ukraine Crisis. In the article, Ambassador Matlock writes about testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee a quarter of a century ago and about the possible expansion of NATO. He told the Senate, quote, I consider the administration's recommendation to take new members into NATO at this time misguided. If it should be approved by the United States Senate, it may well go down in history as the most profound strategic blunder made since the end of the Cold War. Far from improving the security of the United States, its allies, and the nations that wish to enter the alliance, it could well encourage a chain of events that could produce the most serious security threat to this nation since the Soviet Union collapsed. Ambassador Matlock's words. And Ambassador Jack Matlock joins us now. Ambassador, that was you speaking a quarter of a century ago. Why is this so important and relevant today?
Well, thanks for the question. But the reason that I testified, along with a number of other people, many of them had been influential in bringing the Cold War to the end. The reason I testified against expanding NATO expansion, against expanding NATO in the beginning in the late 90s, was because we had, at the end of the Cold War, we had removed the Iron Curtain. We had created what we had aimed for, a Europe whole and free. And it was obvious if you start piecemeal expanding NATO, you are going to, without including Russia, you are going to once again precipitate a buildup of arms and a competition, an armed competition. But there was no reason to do it at that time. Russia was not threatening any East European country. Actually, the Soviet Union in its last years was not, because Gorbachev had accepted the democratization of the East European countries. And actually, one of the last acts of the Soviet parliament was to recognize the freedom and independence of the three Baltic countries, so that we had a Europe whole and free. the task was to build a security architecture that would include them all. And the reason I testified against it was that I saw that a process that we started then, if continued, and if continued up to the borders of the Soviet Union, to the borders of Russia, and included former parts of the Soviet Union that were recognized as part of the Soviet Union at that time, such as, most importantly, Ukraine and Georgia, that this would bring about a confrontation. And I would say my experience and the experience of others during the Cuban Missile Crisis brought home to us the dangers of a military confrontation between countries that have nuclear weapons. At the time, those of us involved, I was in Moscow at the American Embassy. Those involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 did not understand how close we came to a nuclear exchange. We learned that only later. But it would have been a disaster for both sides. And so I had hoped, and I advised that we not start this process of expanding NATO for that reason.
To set the stage, though, let's go back to Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Bay of Pigs. Now, if you're unaware, the Bay of Pigs was a failed landing operation on the southwestern coast of Cuba in 1961 by Cuban exiles who opposed Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution, covertly financed and directed by the U.S. government. The operation took place at the height of the Cold War, and its failure influenced relations between Cuba, the United States, and the Soviet Union. I'm reading this from Wikipedia. In 1952, American Allied General Fulgencio Batista led a coup against President Carlos Prio and forced Prio into exile in Miami, Florida. Prio's exile inspired the creation of the 26th of July movement against Batista by Castro. The movement successfully completed the Cuban Revolution in December 1958. Castro nationalized American businesses, including banks, oil refineries, and sugar and coffee plantations. Then severed Cuba's formerly close relations with the United States and reached out to its Cold War rival, the Soviet Union. With the aid of Cuban counter-revolutionaries, the CIA proceeded to organize an invasion operation. Now, why is the Bay of Pigs invasion such a big deal? Well, it was staged as a false flag to drag Kennedy into war. Well, JFK wasn't aware of what was going on. Allen Dulles set this up, orchestrated it, sent in troops, and then hoped public opinion through the media, Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird, for those of you who don't know, is how the CIA and the FBI use journalists to push their military-industrial complex agenda to the public. This was proven during the Church hearings, and it's still going on today. So our media is just a direct extension of the military-industrial complex, Mossad, FBI, CIA. So the Bay of Pigs was to get and drag us into war. Well, Kennedy did not offer air support. Kennedy was pro-peace and trying to work something out with the communist regime. The big problem we have now is Biden, however, if you've done any shred of research, you know he is intimately tied to Ukraine through Hunter Biden Burisma, 10% for the big guy. So not only is Biden a neocon warmonger who's got us into Iraq, or a neoliberal, they're both the same. They're both controlled by our greatest ally. We don't have the restraint anymore. So not only as Kennedy denied the CIA, Biden is part and parcel of the CIA, and he will do everything they ask, and he will actually orchestrate and assist. That's the difference. Well, what happened as a consequence of the Bay of Pigs, Cuba reached out to Soviet Union. Soviet Union ended up putting nuclear weapons into Cuba. That fomented and set the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So the point being was that the United States was not content having a nuclear superpower right at our doorstep next to Florida. Ukraine has pushed for NATO membership. Putin is treating this in a very similar vein as America treated the Cuban Missile Crisis from the Bay of Pigs. And is Putin wrong to do so? I would argue absolutely not. He is doing and taking steps for the best interest that Russia can have. Now let's talk about the Soviet Union for a moment. In 1917, there was a Bolshevik revolution. I won't go into a ton of detail. I'm trying to keep this pretty short. But the Bolshevik Revolution led to the formation of the USSR, and that was in 1922. So on December 28th of 1922, a conference of plenipotentiary delegates from the Russian SFSR, the Transcaucasian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Belarusian SSR approved the Treaty on the Creation of the USSR and the Declaration of the Creation of the USSR, forming the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So the Bolsheviks were the leadership, and if you understand communism, it is definitely a Judaic, it is the political manifestation of Judaism. But in 1991 is when the Soviet Union fell. And when the Soviet Union fell, that's when Balkanization took place of the USSR. All of these smaller countries were formed. I would argue that that just basically opened them up to be eaten and gobbled up by the intelligence agencies. Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, all of those countries that used to be part of it were eaten up by other powers. So let's throw this in the hands of the United States. Though I disagree being under communism, I guarantee a lot of the people still have a sense of pride, regardless of the leadership. And being destroyed like that and broken apart definitely has to be humiliating, especially when there's a lot of problems with Gorbachev and Yeltsin in setting that stage to happen. Now, what happened after communism fell in 1991? Everybody's under the impression that Putin is just an extension of the Bolsheviks and the communists. Now, his mom's name is Shalomova. That definitely, through his mother's side, I have yet anybody to prove substantially that he is not Jewish. So Putin, from what I'm seeing, is definitely Jewish. He's met with Chabad Lubavitch. He's been to Israel multiple times. And then we have Zelensky. Rumor has it Zelensky is a cousin of George Soros. The same George Soros I mentioned in my last video. The same George Soros who runs the Open Society. And they have color revolutions where he orchestrates financial policy to topple governments. The Arab Spring was a color revolution. The Orange Revolution in Ukraine was a color revolution. Supposedly the United States, if Hillary and Bill were going to win, we were going to go through the Purple Revolution. I would argue that's going on right now, only they're using Biden as that. But let's go back to the Ukraine and Russia. So in 1991, communism falls. What happened to Russia from that point on? The USSR legally ceased to exist on December 31st of 1991. The new state, called the Russian Federation, set off on the road to democracy and a market economy without any clear conception of how to complete such a transformation in the world's largest country. Like most of the other former Soviet republics, it entered independence in a state of serious disorder and economic chaos. So basically, the communist government collapsed, left all the people holding the bag. Now, when communism collapsed, it wasn't just an automatic transition. There were still elements of communism in the market, so it was a hybrid system. What happened was the banksters saw their opportunity, and the IMF entered the picture. In 1995, the government, through loans secured from the International Monetary Fund and through income from the sale of oil and natural gas, succeeded in stabilizing the national currency by establishing a ruble corridor. This corridor fixed the exchange rate of the ruble that the Russian central bank would defend. Consequently, the rate of inflation dropped and some macroeconomic stabilization ensued. However, the government continued to borrow large sums of money on domestic and foreign markets while avoiding real structural reforms of the economy. By failing to establish an effective tax code and collection mechanisms, clear property rights, and a coherent bankruptcy law, and by continued support of failing industries, the government found it increasingly expensive to maintain an artificially set ruble exchange rate. The problem was that the government's set exchange rate did not reflect the country's economic reality, and thereby made the ruble the target of speculators. As a result, the ruble collapsed in 1998, and the government was forced to withhold payments on its debt amid a growing number of bankruptcy. The ruble eventually stabilized and inflation diminished, but the living standards of most Russians improved little, though a small proportion of the population became very wealthy. So enters the oligarchs. So basically, Russia was just getting destroyed by economic policy as well as the corruption of its now hybrid government that wouldn't quite make all the steps necessary to become a capitalist society. But once the IMF came in, that basically opened the door for debt slavery 100%. For several years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Yeltsin placed a high priority on relations with the West, particularly with the United States. The initial honeymoon period in U.S.-Russian relations ended abruptly as it became increasingly clear that some geopolitical goals of each country were incompatible. Russia opposed the eastward expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty, creation of NATO, a defensive alliance. In response to NATO, you have the Warsaw Pact. The Eastern Bloc countries create its own military alliance in 1955. (1991) Dissolution of the Soviet Union. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, that ends the Warsaw Pact. Now watch what happens after 1991 with all the Eastern Bloc countries and how fast NATO gobbles them up. So now in 2022, you have Ukraine declaring their aspiration to join NATO. So if you were Putin and saw the writing on the wall, that would literally put nuclear potential weaponry on your border. Just like with the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, America doesn't want nukes in its backyard. Same thing with Russia. And based on how far NATO has expanded and how quickly, Putin, what choice does he have? Now we have the Ukraine crisis. Putin also took an active role in the events in neighboring Ukraine, where a protest movement toppled the government of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014. The protests began in November 2013 when Yanukovych scuttled a treaty that would have strengthened ties between Ukraine and the European Union. Instead, he sought to steer the country into the proposed Eurasian Economic Union with Russia. After a bloody crackdown in Kyiv left scores dead and hundreds wounded, Yanukovych fled to Russia. Now, what was this bloody crackdown in Kyiv? Oh, it was part of the Orange Revolution. It was part of the Open Society of George Soros. It was part of the CIA, the State Department, and the Mossad putting their assets in place. And that bloody crackdown in Kyiv was assassins killing regular people for the media and the cameras in order to sway public opinion to get people to say that Ukraine needed to go to the European Union. On February 28th, armed men whose uniforms lacked visible insignia took control of key sites in the Ukrainian Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Along the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the Crimean Peninsula was home to a predominantly Russian population, and the movement of Russian troops into the region was not opposed. Understand that Ukraine, though it was its own entity, there were a bunch of people that were still Russian sympathizers. Everybody on the east, well, I can't say everybody, but a big group of people on the east wanted to go back to being part of Russia. Luhansk, Donetsk, and in theory, though I don't accept it as a real annexation, a real vote, but they in theory had a vote, and they are now part of Novorossiya, New Russia. What else has gone on with Russia? Well, Putin found out the game that the International Monetary Fund was playing with Russia, and he got them out. He paid off all the debt using Russian gas, Russian assets. Russian President Vladimir Putin has a bee in his bonnet about debt. Having lived through the 1998 crisis when Russia's financial system was wiped out for the want of a few $1 billion to meet the government's obligations, there has been a strong never again meme that has run through the Kremlin's financial policy. Amongst the first things that Putin did when he came to power in 2000 was pay off all Russia's debt to the International Monetary Fund. Early, and then shortly afterwards, the so-called London and Paris Club debts left over from the Soviet Union days. During the boom years, Putin signed off on former Finance Minister Alexei Kudrin's plan to ring-fence several reserve funds that amazingly were kept away from greedy oligarchs and profligate Duma deputies. This February, Putin crowed in his State of the Nation speech that Russia's cash reserves had grown so big, the country can now cover its external debt dollar for dollar with cash as Russia's gross international reserves overtook the external debt for the first time ever. That's huge. Russia is 100% independent financially. There was one other gentleman in the past who took those steps as well, and all of Judea declared war against him. That was Adolf Hitler. So Russia doesn't have necessarily a fiat currency with the ruble. Fiat means take it on faith. The only reason why anybody uses our dollar now, based on the Federal Reserve, is because our military forces it. It's might makes right. There's nothing backing it other than sheer power. There's literally, we obviously aren't an oil power. We could have been. We were energy independent under Trump. But as soon as Trump frauded in the election, and even then I'm not going to defend Trump, it's all staged. All of the elections are staged. This whole narrative has been planned and scripted. However, the way it's playing out, we were energy independent. Biden and his Ukraine connections, the spigot is on and they're making money hand over fist with these bills under the disguise of this war to Ukraine. It's just money laundering. Huge, huge money laundering. And huge military contracts for Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, etc. So Putin, he made his people free. He says, finally free from the icy grip of the Rothschild banking cartel and the New World Order cabal. 2 years previous, President Putin prohibited the Rothschilds and his New World Order banking cabal from operating in Russian territory under any circumstances. Addressing the Russian parliament following his inauguration, Vladimir Putin said that, stating, total independence from the worldwide banking cartel and the Rothschild global money-providing organizations would be the biggest gift he could provide to future generations. Quote, we used to behave naively, but now we see the World Trade Organization rules are all too often broken. The restrictions are imposed for political reasons, which they call sanctions. Plus, more and more of them are imposed to secure its favorite competitive advantages. He stated that the brand new constraints breaking the world trade principles make the world see that monopoly of the United States dollar threatens for many areas. Putin says he's freed Russia from their dependence on the US dollar. And why can't a country have its own currency backed by its own banking? Why do we have to have a global cartel? Some private entity lending money at interest. It's insane. How are we, as the superpower, borrowing money from a third party and paying it back with interest on our tax dollars? It is a scam, a grift, and a con on all levels. the IMF, the WTO, World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, and the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, all of that needs to be brought down. And everything has to be restructured. I do not want to go into a digital banking system. The second we go all digital, we are perfect slaves. But there has to be something else where all nations have their own currency that they are able to create just in and of the belief that they are an independent and sovereign nation. If it's going to be fiat, fine. Why doesn't each country control its own monetary policy and everybody works itself out instead of this new world order, one world currency that we see being pushed now? I will also say that Bitcoin is nothing but the beta test to use us, the slave class, to work out all the kinks, and now we're going to get the CBDC, the banking digital currency. I mean, once that happens, we're done. So hopefully we can avoid that. But Putin, he did. He freed his people. Do we think that might be an added reason why NATO, who is just a military extension of the Cabal and the banksters and Israel, wouldn't that be a reason why they'd want to take out Putin? Now, if I don't believe it's all orchestrated, which I do, I believe that Russia, Putin, and Zelensky in Ukraine, they're just characters. They're just actors. They're both being controlled by the same entity. But if I do have to believe it's organic, and I have to want to pretend that Russia actually cares about its people, though I know Putin is Jewish by blood. They say he is Russian Orthodox. He converted. Maybe he cares about his people. I don't see it. I just see it as another way of getting Slavs on all sides to kill each other. That's what I personally think. But if I have to pick a team, I'm definitely going to go with Putin because I definitely empathize with him wanting to protect his people, if that's really how it is. I don't believe that this lie known as democracy, this mob rule, has helped Ukraine at all. Ukraine is nothing but a deep state money laundering haven, same as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Bulgaria, all of those Eastern Bloc countries, all of these satellites of bigger countries have all been turned into cabal operations. Human trafficking, and that's not even to mention the biolabs that were put in there. So Ukraine vies for participation in NATO. They also have all these biolabs. Who knows what they've been making? All the information coming out about the vaccines is getting horrific. So Putin, in theory, has gone in and put a stop to a bunch of these biolabs. If you accept that. If you don't, I can't help you on that. And I'm not going to try to convince you either. I'm just going to say, based on the U.S.'s response to the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, to not empathize with Putin, to realize that NATO is growing and expanding and eating up all these countries and bringing them under the Cabal umbrella, then what? What about Donetsk and Luhansk, those places that after 2014 they said they wanted to be part of Russia, and yet they've been getting genocided by Zelensky and Ukraine and the Azov Battalion, who are actual Nazis. So Putin is definitely, in my opinion, doing what he has to do for his people if it's organic, which I don't believe it is. I still believe they're both controlled again. So as it stands, in response to NATO, Putin invaded and has annexed those countries. Ukraine is currently just a proxy, and they're looking for the new Bay of Pigs. And Biden set it up. So here is Bay of Pigs Part 2, the false flag that the U.S. orchestrated to drag itself into war.
Well, I'll take a couple questions each. Reuters, Andrea, you got the first question.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Chancellor Scholz. Mr. President, I have wanted to ask you about this Nordstream project that you've long opposed. You didn't mention it just now by name, nor did Chancellor Scholz. Did you receive assurances from Chancellor Scholz today that Germany will, in fact, pull the plug on this project if Russia invades Ukraine? And did you discuss what the definition of invasion could be?
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
The leaks are under investigation. There are initial reports indicating that this may be the result of an attack or some kind of sabotage, but these are initial reports and we haven't confirmed that yet. But if it is confirmed, that's clearly in no one's interest.
So the United States blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is the pipeline they just built to bring gas from Russia to Germany. And the United States blew it up, and they blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2. And so what does this mean? This means that it's horrible for Europe, and we're going to come to, you want to talk about a winter of death that's coming up. It's coming up. Europe is in a big crisis. And I can't believe they're letting the United States do this. Putin just gave a speech where he challenged the other Western countries to stand up to the United States because you could see what they're doing. They're going to inflict unbelievable pain on Europe and Germany so that we could sell more liquefied natural gas to Europe. That's what this is. At the base of this, that's what this is about.
I'm amazed they're making it like you'd be like a 9/11 truther to say that America did it. As if, like, if the Twin Towers, before it happened, the president's like, we're going to knock down the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
And then everybody goes, well, how do you know? I don't know. For some reason, they said they were.
So here's Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. The pipelines are blown up. Guess what? He thinks it's a good thing.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to, once and for all, remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come. But meanwhile, we're determined to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the consequences of all of this are not borne by citizens in our countries, or for that matter, around the world. Ultimately.
Yeah, they're gonna do everything they can to make sure the consequences of this aren't felt by our citizens or allies, citizens across the world. And what they can do is tell you to shut up and stop complaining that you're cold this winter. That's what they will do.
Look, we're doing everything we can. It's not a lot or anything.
So he sees this as an opportunity. Isn't that weird that he sees this opportunity? It's like Putin couldn't get any crazier, right? He'd blow up his own pipeline, which just so happens to be a great opportunity for America.
See, Jimmy, this is why I keep telling you to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because you're being real poor dad right now about. Rich Dad says, hey, this is a great opportunity to make some money. Poor Dad's like, I'm freezing.
Boy, that Putin is really bad at chess, I bet you, huh? He thought he was screwing us, blowing up his own pipeline.
Either he is or we are. I don't know who.
No, this is a great opportunity. And we can only go by what we know for sure. Kurt, Putin sabotaged his own gas line. That's settled. I like when a guy can egg on nuclear war without moving his teeth. That's what I liked about it.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to, once and for all, remove the...
It's a tremendous opportunity. It's a great opportunity. Hey, was that the word that you lost your second grade spelling bee on? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus.
So that's what this is all about, dummies. If you didn't know already, this is now we're going to get Europe off. And I wish I could, if I was better at this, I would have gone back earlier today and found me saying exactly this. This is about the United States wanting to sell more liquefied natural gas to Europe. And that's exactly what this is about.
Wait, don't you think it's more likely, though, that it's really, we just really fight for freedom around the world, and just so happens we have a great opportunity here.
I mean, I was predicting that wasn't predicting. I was telling you that's what this is about. The whole Ukraine thing, and I mean, and they've been saying this for years. I had a video of Condoleezza Rice, which I had, and I forgot to put in the goddamn keynote.
We watched that, didn't we, recently? That
yes,
Condoleezza, yeah. Well, it's like Iraq. It's not. I mean, Colin Quinn, who's a really smart guy and has like good takes at the time. I remember being like, it's not just for oil. Like, that's how we all like. We wouldn't do all this just for some oil.
Yes. What else would we do it for?
Yeah, and then
kittens and bumblebees.
So I'm not smart enough to not fall for that. But after 20 years of noticing, like just those whole wars, those were planned by people who don't smoke any pot.
That's right,
and that's the results they get.
Yeah,
like they screen out the potheads.
Yeah,
and that's what they come up with. You don't think everybody just been for oil? Like,
anyway. Just a coincidence that someone else blew up the pipeline, giving the United States a tremendous strategic opportunity.
So the U.S. took out Nordstream 1 and 2 in hopes to be the sole provider, using their oil ties to send energy to the European Union. OPEC goes, oil, why should we give you cheap oil when you're just going to arbitrage it? So in defiance of the Biden administration, OPEC has cut their production. There's a solution to it, but it's too simple. If we were energy independent... Oh, but fossil fuels, global warming. Not a hill I'm willing to die on nor care about. And whatever climate change has been taking place, yeah, it's man-made, as in geo-engineered purposefully using military technology. But to blame us for these nonsense corporations, the modern-day slavers of the Goyim, to blame us for their issues is ridiculous. So OPEC, and rightfully so, why not make a buck? That's all Biden was trying to do. And also use it as a tactical advantage to frame Russia, but too many people see through it. There is no reason why Putin would want to destroy his own pipeline that he had purposefully shut off as leverage. Oh, but to destroy it means no, that wasn't his intention. His intention was to use it as leverage so that they would finally cave on sanctions so that he could go back to business and making Russia great again. Just like in Syria, when ISIS, Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, i.e. Mossad, would cry and gas and chemically attack the people in Syria, and then turn around and say Bashar Assad attacked his own people when he was winning. Makes no sense. Yet we're so bought into the propaganda, we are so bought into the MK Ultra lies of the Mockingbird media and the Judeo-corporate press that they tell us anything and we accept it. We are living in an insane world and we accept their narratives. We got to open our eyes and break the spells in the programming. And he knows it's just a matter of time before the psychopaths running NATO and globalism would declare 100% kinetic war on your people. So unless you're a total agenda chill and bought into the Ukraine, bought into the COVID, bought into Russia, you would have a shred of empathy and try to look at it from the other team's point of view. I was an agenda chill for a very long time, born into the religion I was. I always thought that you had to go a certain way politically, and I'd never question authority, never question narratives. I bought everything the TV told me. So after 9/11 hit, and Bush came out and pushed the Iraq War, I remember even in Desert Storm 1, around 1991, 6th grade, I was already its biggest cheerleader, thinking, wow, how cool, patriotism, military. And now that I've had my eyes open and realized most evil has been propagated by the handler of the United States and the control of our Congress and political parties by this handler of the United States. The United States has very much been the bad guy, all too many times. So Biden came out on record saying that this was the most dangerous potential of nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I started creating this video before he said that. And my biggest worry, and that I know these demons aren't beyond doing this, is to set the stage for American boots to be on the ground, would be to commit more false flags on ourselves to justify it. All they'd have to do is have the media run cover, and even when they beat or hurt or do anything to our own people, so many people will side with the media propagandists and jump on the bandwagon to send troops over there. So that's exactly what I'm saying. Our government at some point, just like they did to Nordstream 1 and 2, they will do another false flag. I'm guessing it possibly will be internet, something we'll do financially. But our own government has been saying in New York what steps to be taken for a nuclear attack. Why are they saying that? Oh, they're trying to deflect it to Russia, but for those of us in the know, we know that our government is not beyond, just like the Bay of Pigs, and so many other false flags that our own government has perpetrated on its own people for its own agenda. Apathy is suicide, and I won't bear the blame.